Now, the role of the Dutch Reformed Church in supporting the apartheid system and promoting institutionalized race separation cannot be disputed. And that is why anti-apartheid activist Reverend Dr Allan Boesak has dedicated his life's work to fighting against religion being used for racist ideology. Now, a series of webinars will be held starting this afternoon, where Dr Boesak will share his knowledge about black theology and its role in liberation. He joins us now to tell us more about the project ahead of that first webinar this afternoon. Dr Boesak, thanks so much for your time, and let's talk about what you're going to be telling us. 10 webinars, we understand, that have been scheduled. What exactly do you want South Africans to know about the role of the church in the past and the role of the church going ahead, and black theology?
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for having me on. Today's series of lectures that begins in Cape Town in St. George's Cathedral is looking at the rise and the development of black liberation theology, which, as people might know, came to us in the late 1960s together with the philosophy of black consciousness. And it was a movement that rose up against, of course, the political oppression that our people had experienced, the colonialism and the imperialism that had been in our presence and had us under its heel for more than 350 years, but also more specifically the role that Christianity, as expressed by the white churches in this country, especially the white Dutch Reformed churches in this country, had helped to make a justifiable one, placing it as, or presenting it as a kind of expression of God's will for all of us. And that has been a project of colonialism in missions and in the way in which Christianity was preached from our pulpits, not only from the white church pulpits. And black theology was a movement that rose up and said that kind of reading of the Bible, that kind of claim upon Christianity, that kind of preaching, that is false. It is blasphemous. It is a heresy. It is not the kind of Christianity that black people wanted to embrace. And so, reading the Bible differently, black theology came up with a totally new understanding of what the Christian gospel was all about. And that was a direct attack, not only on white Christian ideas and white Christian ideology, but also on the political structures that ideology produced.
And for those of us who are not Christians, Dr. Boesak, maybe explain to us what has been the lasting impact of this. I mean, many might say to you, okay, we know what happened. We know that, maybe sermons back in the day, in the days of apartheid, were used to justify the actions of the time and the ills and the evils of the time. But surely they might say to you, we've moved past all of that. So what has been the lasting impact? Because you would imagine that we would know better now, and those teachings would be a thing of the past. We know they were not true.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to have those blatant teachings that apartheid is a Christian project. That's no longer necessary, because the people in charge do not claim to be as blatantly Christian as those white Christians did claim when they were in charge. The African National Congress and our ruling classes today don't see the need to claim God on their side, even though they fight mightily to still have the churches on their side and to exploit the people's faith to keep them in power. And that we can talk about at some other time. But what we have found is that although the preaching of apartheid is no longer necessary, the practices of apartheid under the guise of new liberal capitalism that our ruling classes have been practicing since 1994, that is very much present. Apartheid is gone from the books, but apartheid is practically present just about everywhere. And that you can see in all sorts of ways in the gap between the rich and the poor in general in South Africa, and the scandalous gap between the black rich elites and the black poor masses that's even wider than the general gap. You can see that in the way our people are being treated. You can see that in the way in which groups are still privileged in South Africa. You can see that in the way in which racism in subtle or less subtle form has returned in ethno-nationalistic ways. So what black consciousness and black theology was saying in those days, and this is what young people came to me to ask, why are those things still so very relevant in a South Africa 25 and 27 years after apartheid had been conquered, so to speak.
And I suppose you might also have those who might ask you, but how do we place all of this, on the plate of going back all these years and looking at what was being taught under the name of Christianity, and how much of it, like you say, is maybe a longer conversation for a different time, is what is happening now, where we have the government of today doing things, that are creating similar gaps, and how do we justify that then, and why are we talking about this when we have that to talk about,
Well, I mean, this is not a conversation about what happened in apartheid.
Yes.
This is not a conversation about what white Christians used to say. It is a conversation about how the rulers of today had not fundamentally changed those things that have become the legacy of apartheid, how they have rather turned those very things that kept black people in the position of oppression that worked then, how they have turned those things into instruments for their own privileged situation today. That is what we are talking about right now. We are saying, why is it that black people still are oppressed in the same ways that we were oppressed back then? What is it that makes this situation profitable for a small elite and for certain groups, but not for the vast majority of our people? And those are the issues that we will be discussing. So we will of course ask what happened in the past, why has black theology come up, but then the most important question is, why is black theology, black consciousness, the critique on society, on our economy, and so on our political ways of doing, why is that so relevant today? Steve Biko said in 1970 already, if we have a situation in which we simply have a change in faces in office, but the policies remain the same, especially economically, he said, then South Africa will be exactly what we were yesterday. And that is what we are seeing today. And so we are asking those things that black consciousness saw even then, that black theology railed against even then, those are the things that are prevalent and that has sort of brought us to a new struggle against the very people who are claiming to be our liberators.
And Dr. Boesak, I would imagine you will be focusing largely in that series of webinars on lessons learned, and also hopefully drawing comparisons with today and the abuse of religion, the abuse of congregants. I mean, you're well aware of the past couple of years, the bizarre goings-on that we've seen with some who claim to be holy men, who claim to be preachers and pastors, and how they've abused congregants. And I'm hoping, are you going to be drawing those comparisons and talking about what we need to be doing?
Absolutely. I described that kind of, and you must remember, all of the so-called third world, Latin America, Africa, as even India and parts of Asia have been hit by this kind of new fundamentalist Christianity. I call that a new expression of new colonialism. It's the expression of an imperialist theology brought over to our nations by America. And it is broadcast in South Africa alone over, what did they say, 33 channels or so, 24 hours a day. And it is a way of taking our people's minds back to a colonized situation. And it is placing neoliberal capitalism in place of worship of God. It is worshiping money instead of helping the poor. It is an exploitation of everything that our people hold dear. It is a kind of new form of religion that we must fight against as clearly as we fought against the religion and the abuses of apartheid.